This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. To close out 2023, we did a series of interviews with folks that had been on the city council over a long period of time. To welcome the new school year, we're going to do a similar series with the school board. Today, I'm joined by Sam Allen, who served on the school board from 1993 to 1996. He's going to talk to us about what it was like in the 1990s with education here in Dover and the community in general, and talk to us about his time on the school board. Sam, welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
As I said, we're starting in the 1990s. We're talking to you about that era. Had you been involved with the community before you ran for school board?
Yeah, I had done some, I was a pretty young guy, and I was just really getting involved in the community. I had been president of the Kiwanis Club and, had done some other things. I had been the president and treasurer of the Dover Group Home. And, so I was just really starting to get involved in things in Dover. And, I saw the school board as an opportunity. I think I went into it with, really pretty wide-eyed. I was going to make all kinds of changes happen, and it was going to be exciting and fun. And, I think the same thing that I think many people who get into a municipal position, elected position, feel when they get into it, that they're going to have a lot of energy and enthusiasm, are going to make changes happen.
So you ran in 92 and sat starting in 93.
Yeah.
What was the community like at that time?
Well, I think that we were a developing community, I think. I think we were really trying to find our identity as we moved into the 90s and we're facing, the next millennium. I think we were really trying to figure out who we were. We were doing a lot of things within the community. We have to remember that this was pre-technology. This was still the old days. And, so I think that, we had, a very vibrant newspaper. We had very vibrant radio stations. There was a lot of information and messaging that was being transmitted in the community. A lot of it was conflicting. I think people weren't really sure about what direction Dover was heading in. But I think people felt that there was a need for change. There was a need for change in the city council. There was a need for change in the school board. We had a superintendent of schools who had been here for several years. We had several people on the school board who had been on the board for several years. And I think that there was just a little bit too much camaraderie that was happening between the administration and the board, when in reality, the board is the policy makers and they're the ones that, hold people accountable for what was going on. And we were hearing more and more from the community about their displeasure about what was happening in terms of accountability and quality and other kinds of things. And so I think there were many of us that had young children in the school system, which is currently what happens, I think, when it motivates people to get on the board. And we really felt like, well, we have a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and we can work together and make changes happen. And this is going to be a wonderful world where, it's going to be rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah.
And
did you all stand on a mountaintop with Coke?
Yeah, pretty much. I think we were fortunate that the year that I was elected, we had some really outstanding people that were elected. Obviously Doris Grady, icon of education here in Dover. Brian Gottlob, who has gone on to become a chief economic voice here in New Hampshire. Lynn Ann Clark, who was very bright and very skilled. We had Alice Briggs, who was a Dover person and had a broad background in education herself. So we had a really dynamic, I think, group of young people, very bright, very energetic, who really wanted to make changes happen.
It sounds like there was good camaraderie amongst the board members, the incoming board members. You all had a good baseline of desire to move things forward, the energy, and it sounds to some degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a similar mindset of we need to pause, look at where the education system's going, and reassert some values.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that we really felt that, innovation and creativity needed to be recognized and rewarded. And I think a lot of us felt that wasn't happening. And so I think that was the motivation, I think, for many of us to get involved, is that we really wanted to energize things. We felt that things were becoming kind of stale and, like I said, complacent. It was just an everyday grind in the school systems, and that's not the way it should have been.
So during your term, were you just a board member? And I don't mean to make it sound demeaning to say just, or did you serve as one of the officers?
Yeah, I all of a sudden found myself being chair. I got elected chair. It isn't something that you run for. It's just that nobody else wants to do it. So, you get sort of stuck doing that. And so I think I've always had an ability to lead, but I wasn't prepared for what that involved. I was a young guy. I was in my late 30s. I didn't have the inside view of budgeting and state regulations and union stuff and all of that. Like I said, I went into it really with, just thought everything was going to be wonderful, and it just wasn't.
How much time did you expect to spend as a school board member, and how much time did you spend?
Well, the unfortunate thing, Chris, is that, I had a very young child that I had to spend time with. He was in first grade when I got elected to the board. And so it really demanded that I took a lot of time away from him. And like I said, this was all pre-technology. So, you couldn't do things at, 11 o'clock at night on your computer. There wasn't that. So we would get reams and reams and reams of printed material that we had to digest every week before our meetings. And so I was spending hours in that process alone, just trying to learn what I was supposed to be doing. And to his credit, Jerry Daly, who was the superintendent of schools at that time, was very supportive. If you know Jerry, he's a very kind, gentle man. He was very good about working with the board, and really did bring us along in terms of what we needed to know and how we needed to do things. But it was a tremendous amount of time. We were out every night at a meeting, a subcommittee meeting, some other meeting, 5 nights a week. And then on weekends, I would get my packet and I'd spend 3-4 hours reading the packets of information. It was tremendously time consuming. It was unreal. And then trying to work a full-time job and have a family on top of that, it was brutal.
What were some of the projects that came before the school board or policy decisions the school board had to make at the time?
Well, like I said, I think that we really felt that, there needed to be more accountability in the school system.
Yeah.
We had a very aggressive, I think, union leadership at that time, teachers union leadership, the Conways, if anybody knows them. Mm-hmm. They know Bev and Tom Conway were brutal in their defense of the union. And, so I think that people, sorry to say this, but I think people were afraid of them and didn't really confront them or really try to negotiate with them. There was no negotiation there. So the union was really intransigent. They wouldn't move for anything or change the ways that they worked. We had a number of teachers because of that. We had a number of teachers in the school system that were not functioning at the level that we had hoped that they would function. And they had been here for years and years and years, and they needed to move on and make other career decisions. And so we started to hear those kinds of stories. I think because we were a new board, people started coming forward because they weren't comfortable talking about these things before, started bringing them to our attention. At the same time, on the horizon, there were a whole variety of changes that were happening in the Dover school system, one of which was the health ed curriculum. I think that was one of the major things, is that we're in the process of developing a health ed curriculum, which we thought was fairly comprehensive. But we had a large faction of very conservative religious groups that felt that it should be abstinence-based only. And shouldn't be talking about anything else that has to do with sex in that curriculum. So they took it upon themselves to basically bring in hundreds of people to our meetings, protesting outside. We had theater group, like this big theatrical performance in front of the school board one night, unrolling this big thing with signatures on it about how they opposed our health ed curriculum. We got a lot of national attention for that because I think that many other school systems were beginning to deal with that. I mean, up to the 90s, you had sex ed was taught in the home ec room with dark paper over the windows so that nobody could see in. And now we were actually talking about these issues in public, and people were very uncomfortable about what was happening. I think parents felt that it was their right to educate their children in these issues. And I think that, the school system felt that it had an obligation in terms of comprehensive education, biological and health education, to teach students these things. So we had to find that balance of what was right and what was going to serve our community. And it was very tumultuous, and it was very uncomfortable at our meetings.
I just had a flashback to sitting in one of the interior rooms at the old Dover High and having probably a video or video. Now we say video, but movie of sex ed with, it was clearly a 1970s product. And that would have been 92 or thereabouts. And so I can totally relate to the no windows,
right.
Let's shield this from the outside view.
I think probably one of the other significant issues which really affected me personally was that we had probably one of the earlier first shootings in a school here in Dover. I don't think many people even know it or remember it, but it was a Garrison school, 4th grade. We had a student that brought in a loaded handgun, and it discharged in the classroom. And nobody had any script for this. Nobody had any previous histories for this. And so all of a sudden, we had national media that was descending on Dover, and we had to be in front of the cameras and try to be, responsive to people's concerns and fears about how this was going on. And then we had to handle these 4 boys that were involved in this shooting. 3 of the boys, had IEPs. 1 boy did not. And so we had to figure out, how do we balance our responsibility to educate the kids that were special ed and also the kid that was not. There was a community outcry here that we needed to throw them out of the schools, banish them from ever coming back to Dover schools again. We're talking about 10-year-olds.
Right.
10-year-olds.
They made a poor choice.
Made a very bad choice, and they weren't being malicious or malevolent about it. And so, I think we debated for hours. It was really difficult for us. And what we ended up doing is we ended up, suspending them for the year, kicked them out of the school for a year, but we provided tutorial support for all of the boys so that they weren't behind when they came back to school in 5th grade. And I think that their parents were very happy about that, particularly the boy who wasn't special ed, that we decided that we were going to support them and continue with their growth and their learning and to teach them, ways to be able to respond and get above this incident so that it didn't frame the rest of their lives. I think that was one of our concerns.
During your term, were there any large construction projects? I think the kindergarten annexes were a little bit later.
Yeah, it was a little bit later. We knew that we had a problem with the middle school. The middle school was here in the O'Connell Center.
Right.
And it was dated. We had all those kinds of problems, I'm sure, as you know, here in terms of the building. And it just wasn't suitable for education anymore. So we knew that we had to build a new middle school. So, our board was very involved in that initial process, scoping out land, trying to figure out if it was going to meet our needs. There was some contention because, the site that the school board wanted to purchase, the superintendent, for whatever reason, didn't see the value in it and went ahead and signed a PNS on another piece of land, which is our current middle school.
So where was your favorite location?
Our favorite location was where Portsmouth Christian Academy is right now, the hospital that was there.
Seabourn
Hospital was right near Garrison School. We thought it was going to work out well. There was land for development. You could go up, you could go out. The land that we ended up purchasing where the middle school is now, we know the confines of that. You can't go up, you can't go out, you can't do anything with it. And it was just a poor choice. And it was something that our board was very upset about. That document had been signed, and it was really against our wishes.
Time goes on, you serve a couple terms, you decide that you've accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish, or did you decide that you had other pressures of work, your family, et cetera? Mm-hmm. Or was there another, or a combination of all?
Well, I think that, and I think that, the bloom came off the rose real quick, Chris. I think that we talked about the Conways. I had to sit down across the table from them and then negotiate a teacher's contract with them. It was one of the most difficult and challenging things I've ever done in my life. I'm not saying it broke me, but it pretty much did in terms of how I viewed education. And I don't want to go into details about what was said in the room during those negotiations,
sure,
but it was shocking And I couldn't get over it. And then as a result of that contention, a number of other groups in Dover and the Dover schools decided they were going to form unions too. And so that was the next big thing that we encountered. We had the paraprofessionals that presented us with the teacher's contract, no changes, like no wording change. This is the contract we want. And then we heard that, the bus drivers were going to form a union. And at that point, we said, okay, we're going to go out and contract busing. We're not dealing with another union. And so I think that, what was happening was that you had a lot of staff that were seeing the benefits that the teachers were getting from their contract. And, all of these people that think that the teachers are, they're not paid enough and they're so sad, read the contract. It's one of the most mature teacher contracts in New England. So, there's not much we could do to manage the employees, which is really, that's the part that got me, was that you can continue to fight the fight, but you can't change it because, the litigation and all the other stuff, if you try to change things, we couldn't overcome it.
There was so much entrenched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things that we did, and I'll attribute this to Brian Gottlob, was that Brian Gottlob proposed that we create 1% for progress, and that we took 1% of the school budget and we set it aside for innovation and creativity. And so we asked the teachers to give us proposals on things that they wanted to do within their classroom. And then if we thought that they were of merit, we would fund those proposals. I don't know, we got 30 or 40 proposals the first year. I mean, and we were funding things that were small things. I think of one teacher in third grade at Woodman Park, and she wanted to incorporate geography and mathematics into a unit. And she wanted to buy compasses and maps so that she could take her students out and do orienteering. But it was, I don't know, $300-400. It was small stuff, but it was an extremely innovative and creative thing to be happening in the classroom. And so we started getting more and more of these things. But then we started to see, as we started moving forward and we were awarding these grants, teachers are coming back to us and saying, I'm not going to apply next year. Why aren't you applying next year? Well, because, I'm really being harassed. It's, the other teachers are telling me I can't be doing this. I'm setting a bad example. And so it eventually just sort of petered out. But for the first 2 or 3 years, we had another teacher that incorporated a French unit into her, I think it was first or second grade classroom, and they started teaching kids how to speak French. Once again, $500 for materials. It was crazy, and so I think that was one of the things that I was probably the most disappointed about, that it didn't latch on, didn't stay, didn't continue to grow, because I think it was really a powerful tool in terms of making that accountability happen and really recognizing teachers who were doing outstanding jobs here. As the union president said to me, is that, not everybody can be above average. And my response was, well, we only want above average teachers in Dover. So, that was the contention, and that was where we were butting heads.
Once you become complacent and you accept less than what's really deserving of the students,
right?
Then,
well, as old lady Grady, and I'll say that with a lot of affection because she allowed me to call her that, as old lady Grady used to say, is that a kid who loses 1 year to a bad teacher never makes it up.
To be clear, that's what we called her when I had her in middle school. As we wrap up, when you look back, are there things that really define your term, that things that you look back and say, yep, that's what we accomplished and that's what we should be remembered for?
I think we shook the cage. I think we really did shake the cage. And I think that people all of a sudden were like, well, what do you mean they want us to be accountable? What do you mean that we're going to have to say what we've done this year? And what do you mean we have to meet goals? And I think that all of a sudden now that conversation started happening in a really active way. At the end of our board's term, the superintendent of schools retired. And at that point, we had an opportunity, I think, to bring in some new energy and some new creativity. And we did that. And I think of someone like a John O'Connor, for instance. I think he's one of the best superintendents of schools we've ever had in Dover. And so that was an opportunity for that kind of influence to happen.
Are there any other things you want to leave the listener with about your time on the school board, or some of the activity maybe cover that been since? I know we interviewed last year. We talked about the Dover 400th, which we're instrumental in.
Sure.
Are there other activities that you want to talk about?
Well, I think I've been fortunate in Dover in that I've been able to be involved in things that have made a difference. I think we made a difference in the school board. I was involved in the arena project. Got a lot of brickbats for that. But, we have, 2 arenas that have a significant economic influence on our community as a result of that. The North End Fire Station, once again, took a lot of hits for that. But now the people in our North End are protected. They have safety services where they need them. So I think that was an important thing. I was chair of Dover's 375th. We had a great weekend with, a committee of 5 people that put together a great weekend. And then being able to serve on the 400th was really just a really special thing for me. I was really enjoyed my time there, and I think we had a wonderful, wonderful year.
I would agree. And I think 401 has been a little lacking, so we'll have to create a new committee.
Awesome.
I appreciate you coming in and having this conversation with us. I think it's interesting. People have asked for, what about the school board side? And I think you were a great start for that conversation. So thank you again for coming in and for serving all that you have served with the community.
Well, I appreciate the time. And, I love Dover. I've been here for almost 50 years. And, this is, I wasn't born here, but this is my home. And this is where I raised my son. And, I can't do enough for this community. I just really love it. So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Dover has a wealth of history in its over 400 years of existence. Coming up, Mike Gillis is going to share some of that history with us.
We just heard Sam Allen recall his time on the Dover School Board in the 1990s. Allen served on the school board when the debate over public kindergarten was another hot topic. That debate had actually started many years prior when, this week, in 1981, a Dover School Board-approved kindergarten opened. But that program was short-lived. The public kindergarten program established in 1981 was quickly shuttered by a voter referendum, highlighting the contentious nature of the issue in Dover. In 1985, another non-binding referendum on kindergarten was defeated, albeit by a smaller margin. This set the stage for the renewed debate during Sam Allen's tenure on the school board in the 1990s. As school board chair, Allen found himself at the center of the kindergarten controversy. In February 1996, Superintendent Gerald Daly presented 4 options for implementing kindergarten, with estimated costs ranging from $181,362 to $480,000. Allen, while committed to studying the options, expressed concern about rushing the decision-making process. He said, quote, "I'm not in favor of trying to expedite kindergarten for the sake of kindergarten." The debate continued to simmer throughout Allen's tenure, even after his resignation as school board chair in May 1997. In his resignation letter, Allen cited disillusionment over achieving the board's goals. Interestingly, the kindergarten issue became intertwined with another contentious topic, the use of modular classrooms at Horn Street School, now the Francis G. Hopkins Elementary School at Horn Street. In August 1997, Allen supported a motion to close these modular units. He argued, quote, "I'll tell you right now, you keep those modulars and you're not going to get any support for kindergarten in this community." The kindergarten debate reached a critical point in November 1997 when the school board voted 5-2 to implement public kindergarten for the 1998-1999 school year. The approved plan involved using a combination of existing classrooms at Woodman Park Elementary School and private kindergartens around the city for the first 2 years. However, in January 1998, a new school board reversed the previous board's decision, voting to make kindergarten a completely public program starting in September 1998. This reversal allowed for the construction of kindergarten classrooms at Horn Street and Garrison Elementary Schools, with 2/3 of the $500,000 construction costs covered by state aid. The long and winding road to public kindergarten in Dover reflects a broader trend in New Hampshire. As the last state in the nation to require public kindergarten, New Hampshire only made it mandatory in 2009.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.